Well, there I was, sitting on this leather love seat, exhausted, beyond tired, and I was sitting here, and all amongst around me were these people celebrating, drinking good drinks, eating good food, laughing, because they were in the Christmas cheer, because it was Christmas Eve. But I couldn't find myself to get into the spirit of the things. I just sat there as a shell of a person on that love seat with some bubbly in my hands, just feeling completely exhausted. Too tired to get involved with the different festivities of the day and just to get engaged with it all. Because this year was the year that Amy and I, we transitioned and we moved to another campus, part of the multi-site church that we're a part of. And this year was the year that we started pastoring at this church, and we experienced growth and amazing things, but Christmas was coming up. And Christmas, if you don't know, is one of the biggest times of the year in the church calendar, and it's probably Christmas Eve is the biggest attended event of the entire calendar year. And so as we were stepping into the Christmas season, ourselves and the team decided that we were going to go all out this year. And not just to do one service, but we would do two. But the interesting thing about our context is that we met in a high school, in a theater. We were portable. So it means any production that we put around Christmas Eve was limited because we'd have to set it all up and tear it all down in the same day. But we were looking at our other campus that was a physical location. They had larger campus. They had more resources. They had their own place so they could set up production wherever, but we wouldn't be outdone. At least, probably I wasn't going to be outdone. And so leading up to Christmas, I called in every favor that I had. I got the best musicians I could find. I got the best communicators. We had meetings after meetings about production of how we could create this daunchy, smelly high school theater in the Christmas wonderland. So meetings after meetings and marketing and just about how we could get people out and what would it look like and how could we create the best experience. So the weeks leading up to Christmas were full of rehearsals and strategy meetings and all the rest, on top of the other responsibilities you have around Christmas. Do you know the ones like the gifts you're supposed to get, finding the tree, putting up the lights, that Christmas party, that staff party, that other party, that Christmas production at your kid's school? Oh, I should do baking this year. Oh, I need to figure out that family dynamic, or who's going to be where. Are we traveling? All those details around Christmas. So Christmas Eve came. We did 2 services. It was a big success. Lots of people came. The production was magical. I forgot that we were in a high school theater for part of the night. But as we said goodbye and Merry Christmas and we packed everything down because that was our reality, Amy says, hey, we're going to some family friends for Christmas Eve. We've gone for many years. And so we took the kids, and I find someone gives me some bubbly drink, and I sit down on that couch about 10 o'clock, and I feel exhausted, completely, just so tired that just can't contain conversations, can't get into the spirit of things. And I began to think about this season, and I realized I probably didn't do very many things with my family, or all those Christmassy things you're supposed to do. I also realized that tomorrow's Christmas, which means I was supposed to get all of my gifts by this point, and I'm not sure if I have got them all, and if I did have them, I don't know how much thought I put into Amy's gifts, if she's going to get lots of socks tomorrow. I'm not sure. I definitely haven't wrapped them by this point, so sometime between now and then I have to wrap them. And I begin to wonder, did I miss this Christmas season? Christmas is tomorrow, and I feel like I haven't even paused and reflected on this season. I felt so tired. I felt so exhausted. And the ironic thing was that about a couple hours before, I just spent the entire evening telling a room full just like this, hey, Christmas is here. And the whole point of Christmas is us to pause and reflect of the wonder of the season. Ironically, I told the whole room that, but I didn't feel any wonder that night. I felt comatose. I felt tired. I just realized that Christmas has come and gone, and I'm probably just going to wear my PJs for the next week because I'm so taken back in the season. Merry Christmas. We're less than 1 month away from Christmas. If you didn't know, Black Friday usually signals that for us, that it's time to get your bodies into gear because we are now entering into one of the busiest seasons of the year. It's all coming, folks. This is the time. I hope that credit card is fresh and ready to go. If it hasn't got to work out already from this weekend, it will. This is the time we break in to do all those festivities, and it costs us a lot. Actually, many Canadians go into debt around the Christmas season because we just need to have it all. In fact, we rank third in the world of spending money on Christmas. This is a big time for us with all the events, all the different things we need to do, the gifts, the family dynamics, all the different things, all the different elements. It just comes and it's coming and it's not stopping. But is there a different way we can experience Christmas? I feel like Christmas is like this large wave that comes at me of chaos and it just takes over my life. Takes me out to sea, and sometime in the new year, I find myself back to ground. That's what I feel like sometimes Christmas is for me. I don't know if you can relate, but is there a way that we could experience this Christmas season that's not full of all the chaos, not full of all of the pressure and responsibilities, and get there and do this and figure that out, and all the dynamics of Christmas? Is there a way for us to experience a season that doesn't look so chaotic? Well, the church has had a rhythm for centuries now. This ancient rhythm, this liturgical rhythm called Advent. And Advent is typically the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. And Advent means the notable arrival of a person, thing, or event. See, Advent in the Latin means coming. It's the time that we set aside in the church calendar, and we remind ourselves that Christmas is really about the good news that Jesus came, that God came in the person of Jesus, and we remember that. But it's also a time that we look forward to the return of Jesus, and that's what the Advent season is. So welcome to church. Glad you're here. We're starting a new series today, which is themed around this season of Advent, these next 4 Sundays, and we're calling it the Grand Miracle. I like that. The Grand Miracle. I liked it so much that I stole it. It's not mine. It's not ours. C.S. Lewis actually coined the term in the mid-20th century. When he looked at the story of Christmas, he looked at that story and says, that's the Grand Miracle. There is no other miracle like that. And so we're going to spend the next 4 weeks looking at the ancient story, this Christmas story that probably most of you have heard parts of. But we believe this ancient story has a lot of significance to your day. It has modern meaning for you and I. But this ancient story is ancient. In this series, we're not offering anything new. We're not offering some new ideas based on some new research or a new bestseller that's on the New York Times bestselling. In fact, this Christmas season, we're offering something ancient, something older than you and I, but we believe will be extremely helpful. But before we jump into the Christmas story, we want to pause, because Christmas is coming. We have less than a month. And before we jump into that season, we want to pause and look at the significance of what Advent should create in us, the rhythm of Advent for us as followers of Jesus. So the remainder of our time, we're going to look at the theme of Advent. We're going to look at it in 3 parts: a picture, then anticipation, and excitement. A picture, anticipation, and excitement. First, a picture. So what does Advent mean? This coming, this waiting for something. It's a season of just like this preparation of the arrival of Jesus coming back. How do we feel in that? What emotions should capture us? Well, probably the places for us to feel the emotions of that is looking at the Hebrew scriptures and looking at the Israelites, because they live much of their life in that. If you read the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament in your Bibles, so much of the common theme of that was this expectation of the Messiah. And see, at times this expectation was great, and they had great trust and belief, and then other times it waned. And other times they weren't so much expecting. And a lot of that was actually based on their circumstances, the reality they were lived, based on how harsh or difficult it was. But the Hebrew people, through a period of several hundred years, would birth these prophets, these individuals that would come and to speak about this expectation of the Messiah. But these prophets came at an interesting time in Israel's history. These prophets came in a time where God was on the margins. Similar today. See, most people in the ancient world believed in some type of God. Most Israelites believed in God, but how they lived, that would differ. And most conversations I have with people today, most people believe in some higher power, some being, some godlike individual. But the prophet's responsibility was bringing God from the margin and putting him right at the forefront. They reminded the Israelites, the Hebrew people, of who God was and brought God right back to the forefront, saying, remember these promises that God made for us. Remember the great expectation of the coming Messiah. The prophets would bring him there. These prophets were the ones like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and one of my personal favorites, Amos. But today, we're going to look at a prophet that probably gave the greatest vivid language, really captured the imagination of the Hebrew people, and that was Isaiah. Isaiah lived a long life. And because he lived a long life, he saw a lot. He lived through kings coming and going. He lived through different warring nations around him. He lived through prosperous times and not prosperous times. But most of Isaiah's time, he lived when the political and the cultural and the time of Israel was not good. The nation was in decline. Inflation was high. There was wars around them. There was great poverty. There was political unrest. This is the time when Isaiah lived. And Isaiah tried his hardest to remind the people to capture their heart of the nation for a vision of God's coming kingdom. He constantly tried to remove the Israelites from their current context and remind them of a vision of the last days, of a coming reality that wasn't the one they lived in. But you know how it is. Reality hits. And many of you probably have been around church maybe for a bit. Some of you might be new, but if you've been in church for a while, you've heard things like this. You've heard promises made. You've heard things about how God is this and that. And you've heard this reality of like, hey, this is what God will bring. And this is the hope we have. But reality hits and it changes. Israel often felt that their hope was found in their present day circumstances. That's where they put it. But we believe this reality for a moment. We hear these promises of who God is. And for a moment we believe it. But then, doubt creeps in. And we wander. And then we find other gods to comfort us because we just aren't so sure. We just want to make sure all of our bases are crossed. And we're just not so sure that the hope that Jesus has for us is as practical as what we need right now. And so we find other things that comfort us in the meantime. The day-to-day gets challenging. And we try for a bit, but it just doesn't seem to work. This is the tension in which Isaiah lived. Isaiah was promising a reality, a future, but they were living in a current reality that wasn't it. And they were in this tension. And it's a beautiful picture because this is the tension that you and I are in. See, Advent is a season for us to remind ourselves that God came in the person of Jesus as the Messiah. And we just spent a whole series looking at Jesus. And so that's what most people think Christmas is. Christmas is this time to remember little baby Jesus, the nativity, the three wise men, all this stuff, right? And that is part of the Christmas season, and that's part of Advent. But Advent is also a time to look ahead in expectation of the time that Jesus will return, that all wrongs will be made right, that all tears will be wiped away, that there will be no more poverty. Advent is a time of remembering and anticipation. It's the tension between the two that where we live. We live in the two between things being perfect and Jesus' coming return, and the hope of Jesus, but living in a broken world. We live right smack in the middle of the tension of those two, and we feel it every single day. Here is where we get in touch of the felt experience of the in-between. So Isaiah helps us because he tells us how do we live in this tension of the broken world but the hope of Jesus, right? How do we in one breath speak of great hope and faith and belief in who Jesus is and what he's doing for us, but also live in the brokenness that we experience every single day? Well, Isaiah helps us here. And although he paints pictures of what the future is, later in his writings in chapter 40, he outlines the reality of what many are experiencing. This is what he says in chapter 40, verses 30. It will be up on the screens. He says this, "Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted." In other words, this isn't just for the young of heart that's going to make it. Even young people, people who have the stamina and the ability to carry on, to continue in the faith and to continue to have the belief of the vision of the coming kingdom, which are not experiencing, even those that just have all the gusta and all the willpower in the world, they frail away. They get tired. Day to day is wearisome. But he goes on, he says, "But who will? But they who wait." This is Isaiah's great solution for a hurting nation, a nation living of uncertainty. What does he tell them to do? Wait. But then he gives vivid language behind it. He says, "Those who wait for the Lord, they shall renew their strength." They'll be able to renew their strength to carry on through the day-to-day. And he goes on. He wants you to see it. He wants you to imagine it. "They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." See, Isaiah says, listen, I get the day-to-day is tiresome, it's wearisome, but this way future, this way moving forward, what Advent isn't about us doing more things. Advent is not about us creating the right resilience or the right rhythms or ability. It will those who will pause and wait on the Lord, those who wait. Waiting is the solution that Isaiah gives. But if you ask me, that sounds like a lousy solution. What am I supposed to do with that? What does even waiting look like? See, these are the challenges that waiting brings, but Advent is an invitation to wait as the generations of Hebrews waited and sometimes got sidetracked, but waited for their coming Messiah. See, this pushes against all of our natural order. See, studies after studies are telling us more and more that we're actually the opposite of patience. We have impatience. We distract ourselves, we keep ourselves busy, and we just have a hard time waiting for anything. If our drink takes longer than 2 minutes, we are going to write a Google review about this place. We have a hard time waiting. See, but waiting around the Christmas time is actually quite exciting, right? We get these calendars to remind us every single day. They actually give us sugar and chocolate to say, listen, the time is coming. Waiting around Christmas season is exciting because it's finite. And because we know what the ending will look like. Sometimes we're a bit disappointed on Christmas morning, but for the most part, we know when the time will end and what it will look like. But waiting for most of us in life is not like this. Waiting often is not finite. And the hardest thing about waiting, the challenge of it, is the ending is unknown. The ending is unknown. We're waiting to fall in love, to meet that guy, that girl. We thought this time, Christmas, would be the time that we would have someone to share it with. We're waiting to have children. We thought there'd be more presents underneath the tree this year, but just not the reality, and we just keep on waiting. We're waiting to shift careers. We've been in this dead-end job, or we've been working this career, not enjoying it for months, weeks, years now, and we just thought we'd be somewhere else now. We're waiting. We're waiting to be in a different financial picture. We're waiting to be done with this anxiety. We thought we'd be done with this long time ago. How much longer, Lord? How much longer? How much longer do I have to wait with this? See, waiting brings all kinds of different emotions. It stirs up all kinds of different things in us, and waiting brings more questions than it does answers. But Isaiah told us to wait in this tension of this in-between. Because waiting is actually not passive. It's active. Waiting isn't just sitting by and letting life pass you by, but waiting is active because the Lord does something in us in a season of waiting that he does in other seasons. And some of God's best work in our life happens in a season of waiting, and that's what Advent is an invitation to. It is to wait. Listen to how Walter Brueggemann, the great theologian, talks about waiting. He says this: waiting is in receiving and not grasping. It's inheriting and not possessing, and praising and not seizing. I love this line. It is knowing that initiative has passed from our hands and we are safer for it. See, this whole thing seems counterintuitive to us, that the way that we step into Advent is not to do more things, but it's to sit back and wait. So when we sing these hymns at Christmas time, when we get up and we open the hymn books, we don't, that's up on the screen, but when we sing these hymns, these nice hymns like, oh come, Emmanuel, we are not simply role-playing. We're not simply doing the cute and nice things that we should do because they're festive. No, we join with our Hebrew friends, those that waited for centuries and generations, and we join with them, and our prayers, their prayers, become our prayers as well. And we pray, oh come, Emmanuel, for the Messiah to come and make all wrongs and right. And this season of waiting is what we step into. Advent is a season of preparation. It is to ask the questions of how do we prepare. In other words, Advent isn't just these nice candles that we light or nice rhythm or this nice devotional, this thing that we just simply do to make us more festive like our Starbucks drinks. Advent is a season of preparing us to form us, form our souls and who we are, and it's a season of waiting and us being honest in that waiting. Advent is a reminder that our only hope for happiness is not in this world. Advent reminds us that our only stake of happiness, not all of our chips are based on this world. Our hope is found outside of this. So how do we do that? So how do we live in a season of Advent? How do we become people that don't just speak about these things, sing about these things, but how do we become people of practice? How do we embrace the season of Advent? How do we prepare ourselves? Well, two things for us, and then we'll be done. Two themes that help us. The first one is anticipation. Advent is that. It's a season of anticipation, right? It's leading up. It's these rhythms. It's these moments of anticipating of the coming Messiah. It is that moment. But I don't know about you, but in these anticipation, as we start setting into the Christmas season, other things come to the surface as well. And in fact, we can't actually look forward until we look backward. See, it's been said many times that Christmas season is like a magnifying glass. The Christmas season just magnifies what's already there. So perhaps you felt lonely this year. Christmas season will magnify that. Perhaps you've lost someone this year. Christmas season will magnify that. See, so often our tendency in our society is to keep really busy and do lots of things and distract ourselves with all the events of the Christmas season, but we actually never pause and reflect. And so how we step into the season of anticipation is that we actually reflect on the reality of taking stock of this past year, of what's been challenging. We reflect on the individuals that are not here. We reflect that there's family dynamics that's still going on. The reconciliation hasn't happened, that you thought your family life would be different, but it's still there, that you still have that ailment, or you have a grandparent that's still not well. I like how Tish Harrison Warren says it in her New York Times op-ed. This is what she says: I'm not ready for Christmas yet. I cannot force myself to barrel into the festivities and holiday cheer. I need to take a minute. I need a season to notice, reflect on the grief, what we collectively and I individually have walked through this year and the past few years, really. I need to take stock of where I am and how I got here. The season of Advent is a time for us to take stock. And before you enter into the Christmas seasons, this is a message of preparation. Before you jump into it all, maybe just take a step back and reflect and take a stock of your life and where you're at and where's the pain, and where's the hurt, and where are the joys, and where are the frustrations. And now as I say that, I know I say that to a group full of people that many of you are like, ugh. Many of us we do things to intentionally avoid to ask ourselves these questions. We distract ourselves and we keep ourselves busy so we don't have to reflect and look at our lives. But if I can encourage you that before you jump into the season, that the more willing you are to enter into your pain, to your brokenness, the greater your ability to receive the hope and the peace that only Jesus can bring. The depth of your pain will be the depth of the hope that you experience in Jesus. The depth of your anguish will be the depth of the peace that only Jesus can bring. And sometimes we jump into these things like hope, peace, joy, love. This is the Christmas season, experience it, but we don't actually pause and reflect and take stock of where we're at and where we actually need those things. So my encouragement to you is maybe in this Advent season, start a rhythm. Maybe do something scary and journal for a second. Write down some of your thoughts and your feelings. Take stock of your life. Look at it. Many individuals do different things, whether it's being like a devotional or some series but I just encourage you, just make an effort in this Advent series, in this Advent season. Advent's just not to get us ready for Christmas. Advent's meant to form something deep in you. So we use this season of Advent for Jesus to speak to our soul, for us to hear where God wants to speak to the unique pain and the unique brokenness that is what we've experienced this past year. And it's different for each and every one of us. The anticipation, we ignore it. The way we don't ignore it is we reflect. Secondly, and lastly, excitement. This season's full of excitement. If you have children, you know it. They ask it. I remember my son last year, it was like the first year that he celebrated Christmas, and we had a great day, and I think it was like later on on Christmas Day, he's like, when do we do that again? A year from now. He didn't quite understand that, so like a few days later, is it Christmas again this weekend? No, buddy, we got to wait for a while. We could not afford that amount of excitement every weekend. But when we talk about Christmas, what are we excited for? Like, what do we get excited for? See, so much of the excitement around the Christmas season is around the things that we collect. It's about the consumerism and the materialism, and it's all these things. In fact, $15.8 billion, they estimate, is how many unwanted gifts are out there every Christmas season. That we just buy these things, that we think this is the part of the season, that we just need to acquire all these things and consumerism. That we should be reminded that our joy that we sing about is not about having the new PlayStation, diamond earrings, or that other materialistic thing. But we often get caught up in the season of the consumerism and all these things that we should create. And this deep reflection in which I talked about is often masked by the busyness and the consumerism that we need to go out and buy these gifts, wrap them, and receive them. In fact, we just had Black Friday. Nothing wrong with Black Friday. But we have Black Friday, and then on Monday we have Cyber Monday. Do you know what Tuesday is? Yeah, see, most people don't know what Tuesday is. Tuesday is Giving Tuesday. So in other words, society says, once you've spent a lot of your money on Black Friday, if you got a little bit left, let's get to Cyber Monday. And then after we have these two largest commercial retail days of the year, we have something called Giving Tuesday. If you have a little bit left over, then feel free to give. And so the excitement that we have is we often connect it to consumerism, and then we miss some of the realities of the Christmas season. But the problem with consumerism is not just the stuff. Don't hear what I'm saying. I'm not coming in and saying you shouldn't buy your husband a gift this year or your wife a gift this year, because wives, I don't want to get in trouble here. Nor am I saying you shouldn't buy your kids things, but we should look at what why are we buying these gifts? What things are these doing to our soul? Ronald Rolheiser says it best. He says, so much of our unhappiness comes from comparing our lives, our friendships, comparing our loves, our commitments, our duties, our bodies, and our sexualities to some idealized and non-Christian vision of things, which falsely assures us that there is a heaven on earth. When that happens, and it does, our tensions begin to drive us mad. In this case, to a cancerous restlessness. In other words, Advent is a season to remind us that what our deepest needs are, or what brings deepest fulfillment in our life, is not the things that we acquire. And the way that we fight against this Christmas season, and the way we fight against these deals that just keep coming in your inbox that just feel good, too good to pass up, the way that we change our perspective and we push against that our meaning and our identity come from the things that we own, is we start by looking at the needs of others. How we fight against the pull of materialism is by being generous. That's how we bring excitement of the season to others as well, as we step into generosity. And that looks different for all of us, but the season of Advent is a season for us. Traditionally, the church has seen it as times to be actually really generous. Because this is a time that highlights that people are in positions where they don't actually have some of the basics. And so maybe this year, instead of giving that gift to your dad that never every year seems the hardest person to get a gift for and never really seems happy with the gift you get him anyways, why don't you give a donation to a nonprofit or an organization in his name? Maybe it's looking at this Christmas season about having someone to come for a meal, someone that doesn't have a place to stay this year. Maybe it's finding a nonprofit. Maybe it's sponsoring a child and getting them a couple gifts rather than getting your kids 20. Maybe it's taking time to step into the generosity which the followers of Jesus have for centuries embodied. This Christmas season is to remind us how generous the Lord has been to us, and it's for us to look to others and be generous. Because the excitement of God's kingdom is that. For us to live in the reality of this tension, for us to be excited about the coming of God's kingdom, how we demonstrate that is just glimpses of it. Just glimpses of God's kingdom here on earth, heaven on earth. It's just glimpses of that. And how we do that is by our generosity. We're saying, listen, life is upside down and there's poverty around us and there's issues, but how we are foreshadowing the kingdom of God that's coming is by our generosity. By helping people in need, by seeing who's got nowhere to go this Christmas season, seeing who's in a financial strap or just in a hard place to be. Let me close with this. I'm not trying to be Scrooge this year. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not. Please don't hear that you shouldn't do the traditions and the things around your family that commemorates a Christmas season. All I'm saying is that I think we should be intentional about the season we're stepping into. To not let the wave of the chaos of the season just come and overtake us and we just are lost at sea and just let the flows of culture and society take us from one place to another. But we step back and we reflect and we say, what is the purpose of Advent? What is the purpose of the season? How do we prepare for it? Is it by creating more to-do lists and shopping events? Or is it waiting and preparing for our hearts for the reality of Jesus' return? I'm inviting the team to come back, and as they come back, I just want to end with one illustration that hopefully helps cement this idea for you. So when I came to Vancouver, we didn't have the luxury in Victoria of having a SkyTrain. Which my kids are very excited about, by the way. Thank you for that. We go on the SkyTrain all the time, really for no purpose, but it's a great, cheap way to take them for hours on end. Anyways, so I started taking these SkyTrains, and the interesting thing about the SkyTrain is they'll have different trains going to different destinations on the same track. Meaning you don't just step on the SkyTrain, it will, you think it's going to take you somewhere, but it'll take you somewhere completely different. And there's been multiple times that I haven't quite fully realized this and found myself in Surrey and I was trying to get downtown Vancouver or different things like that. Or it's like I'm distracted when my kids are with me and we just jump into a SkyTrain and then I realize it's this one's going the wrong way, right? And so in the same way, in this Christmas season, how we started, how we're intentional, how we're stepping into it, will determine the destination that we go to. To say another way, I talk to our team all the time of because we just opened up a couple months ago. I say, listen, what we do in this season, what practices we'll invest in, and how we interact, it will determine the direction we're going. And if we're not intentional at the beginning season, if we're not intentional of forming the things that we think are really important, we might find ourselves somewhere that we never planned to be in. And we might ask ourselves, how did we get here? It's because we stepped on the wrong train. So this is a message of preparation for us this season. I wanted to get to you before Christmas and I just missed Black Friday. They got ahead of me by a couple of days. But I wanted to get to you before we jump into this Christmas season and say, hey, maybe this Christmas season, maybe it could look a little bit different. Maybe I actually slow down my rhythms. Maybe I actually reflect and look inwards. Maybe I actually look not to what I want in my Amazon wish list, but maybe I look to the people around me and there's those that I can help. Maybe Advent could do something to form me that looks different, that's not just for Christmas, but actually moves me down. That I look different in 6 months from now because of the decisions I made in this season. That Advent was just positioned in such a way to form something in me in this season. What train are you stepping onto? Because the train you step onto will determine the direction you go, and the decisions you make at the beginning of the season will determine how the entire season goes. And not just this season, but how you play out into the new year, in the coming months. Would you stand with me? I'd love to pray with you before you go. If you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes and just be in position to receive. Father, I just pray for every individual in this room. Lord, you know their stories. You know their history. God, you know this past year that they've had. Lord, you know the things that they've walked through. God, you know the trauma they've experienced. You know the wounds and the hurts and the pains. You know the brokenness that they're walking in with today. So, Lord, I just pray that there would be courage in this room. Father, may we be courageous to look inside. May we be courageous not to just distract ourselves, to keep ourselves busy with one thing after another, but may we step back and reflect and take stock of this year. Take stock of how we're doing. Oh, because we know in those moments when we're intimate with our pain are those same moments that we get intimate with the hope of Jesus. In those moments of frustration and anguish is the same moments that we experience the peace of God like ways we've never experienced before. So I pray for this community. I pray for my friends. May we be intentional of how we step in this season. May we be intentional in how we live out in this season. So Holy Spirit, may you begin to form something in this season that would take us beyond this moment of life, would help shape us and be more in the image of you. So Holy Spirit, I just pray that you would speak to us. God, may you draw circles around things. May you highlight things for us. God, may our communion with you be sweet. Be in moments of just amazing so that we are reminded of our love and our identity in you. Speak to us in this year. Speak to us in this Advent. Beautiful name.